When former Vice President Joe Biden kicked off his campaign in Pittsburgh Monday, he made it clear that his path to the White House runs through Pennsylvania.
I believe that Pittsburgh and my native town of Scranton and my hometown of Wilmington and Claymont, they represent the cities and towns that make up hardworking, middle-class Americans who are the backbone of this nation. That's not hyperbole, the backbone of this nation. I also came here because, quite frankly, folks, if I'm going to be able to beat Donald Trump in 2020, it's going to happen here. It's going to happen here in Western Pennsylvania.
President Trump won the state of Pennsylvania in 2016, but only by 0.7 of a percentage point. That was the tightest margin in the state since William Henry Harrison beat Martin Van Buren in 1840. John Micek joins me now from Harrisburg. John is the editor-in-chief of the Pennsylvania Capital Star. John, thanks so much for being with us. What issues do you see being central to Pennsylvania in the 2020 Democratic primary?
Hi, Elaine. Good Tuesday afternoon to you. Look, I mean, Vice President Biden hit on some of those key issues right there in his speech to firefighters in the Union Hall outside of Teamsters or Steelworkers in Pittsburgh. We're talking about organized labor. We're talking about pocketbook issues. You can expect him to key in on those quite a bit. I mean, these are voters. Some of these voters in Western Pennsylvania, they're union workers who went over to Donald Trump in 2016. You can expect Biden to make a direct play for their hearts and their minds. In the Philadelphia suburbs, social issues like schools and choice and LGBTQ issues will resonate well because the voters there are far more moderate.
Well, is there any candidate that you see being particularly well suited to all of those issues you just mentioned?
Well, I think Vice President Biden certainly considers himself the best suited on those pocketbook issues. You know, you can see a candidate, say, like Kamala Harris or Cory Booker, because he's close to Philadelphia, resonating in the suburbs. But it's hard to imagine them sort of being able to carry the state, which still remains kind of squarely working class, particularly in the Northeast, where Vice President Biden is from, and in Luzerne County, which went to Donald Trump in 2016 for the first time in ages. For the first time in ages.
So you have a new newsletter out with 4 things to think about after Monday's rally. Let's start at the beginning. You write about how if he wins, Joe Biden would be the most experienced candidate to ever serve in the White House. But as we saw with Hillary Clinton in 2016, experience isn't always a predictor of success. So what are the pros and cons of Joe Biden's experience?
I mean, that certainly is the case. Joe Biden has 40-something years in public life as a member of Congress. And 8 years as vice president. He comes to the table with the broadest portfolio of experience, having served in a number of leadership positions in the Senate. So that's what he's got going for him. On the other hand, he has 40 years of experience in public service, which is an extensive record that can be parsed to death. We think, of Anita Hill, his actions on the crime bills in the 1990s. It's a treasure trove for Republican opposition researchers, and I'm sure they're going through it with a fine-tooth comb, finding stuff to try to hit him on. So too are his Democratic opponents.
Well, you also look at the so-called Senate curse. What is the Senate curse, and how does it affect Joe Biden?
Historically speaking, United States senators, and this is some of my analysis, and quite a lot of it is based on University of Virginia political science analyst Kyle Kondick's analysis. Historically speaking, senators have a horrible, horrible time getting elected to the White House. You've seen so many aspirations. You think of Henry Clay, John Calhoun, Daniel Webster, all of whom ran up on the rocks. John McCain, Bob Dole in the modern era. Somebody like Barack Obama was the exception to the rule. Jack Kennedy was the exception to the rule. But in so many cases, we've seen White House aspirations for members of the Senate crash on the rocks.
Well, looking at your last point, you write that, quote, Democrats may still be more likely to want a steady hand. Explain what you mean by that.
We look at the polling data and you talk to Democratic voters, they're focused like a laser on somebody who can beat Donald Trump in 2020. They're less inclined to be ideological than are Republicans, and it really is a matter of being practical and trying to find the right person.
All right. So a lot to look forward to in the weeks, months ahead. John Micek, John, thanks so much for joining us.
You bet.